lot of the misconceptions are that to be autistic means that you're not a people person. I am a big people person. I love humans. I'm very high functioning in my world of work, but I'm very low functioning in my emotional regulation. I'm still the same person. I got my diagnosis and I've gone from not being autistic to autistic. I was always autistic. There's this conversation about autistic people and kind of putting all autistic people in the same bucket, yet every autistic person is different. So just because you know me and I need this, this and this, the next autistic person you meet will be completely different to me. You actually feel like there's something wrong with you. Like, I'm a fully grown adult, so why can't I string a sentence together on a Friday evening?
You've always been this ultra high performer, and I bet some people have looked at you and thought, how does she do this? How does she's like a machine, how does she just keep going and going and going, and then all of a sudden... Laura, please can you share a little bit about your background and who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Laura Hadcroft. I'm a Burnley girl, born and bred. I live literally around the corner from my first ever house, which some will say boring, but I like to say, I don't know, it's home. So my background, I started way back in the first housing crisis in 2007 as a finance apprentice for a company called Vika down on Fountain Road in Burnley. Big PLC, big employer in the area. And then I've literally worked my way up. So I didn't do the uni way, I didn't do the graduate, I didn't do the big four. And I've most recently been working in private equity backed businesses as their head of commercial finance. So I've built teams, mergers and acquisitions, created lots of value. And then I exited the corporate career in July last year. And I'm now pursuing my own endeavours, basically trying to diversify my risk and increase my impact. So I'm a portfolio CFO. I work with small to medium-sized businesses and help them create more value, both in money terms and also for their social impacts.
Amazing. And just out of interest, for anyone listening that wants to take on a similar journey, how long did that take from finance apprentice at Vika to where you are now? Like, how long has that career been?
So probably took 10 years to get from apprentice to senior leader. And then I've spent the last 5 years getting different experience at senior leadership level. So your merger and acquisitions, you're leading your teams, your integration, that kind of thing I've done for the last 5 or 6 years. So yeah, I'd say probably 10 to go from apprentice to senior leader. And and I studied SEMA at night school, so I'm SEMA qualified, and then I've most recently done my MBA with the University of Manchester. So I did eventually get all the qualifications to go alongside my work experience, but instead of getting the qualifications then the experience, I kind of did it entwined, which I've loved because of the experiences and learning that I've seen throughout my career. I think it's better in real time than in a textbook.
Yeah. What we often find as well is those who have done it your way with the on-the-job learning and the apprenticeship tend to fast track in a way because they just get in 3 years earlier, basically 3 or 4 years in some cases. Wonderful. So we've talked about how you were diagnosed as autistic in 2022, and I'm really excited to delve into this because you've been so open about that whole experience and journey since. Can you tell us a little bit about the journey to receiving your diagnosis and how the diagnosis impacted your life?
Yes. So my journey to getting a diagnosis wasn't your normal route, I suppose. So a lot of people get diagnosed as children. But I think, I can't remember the actual dates, but up until recently, it was mainly boys. So it was young boys that got diagnosed as children. It wasn't really seen as a thing in females, and you couldn't get diagnosed as an adult anyway, up until quite recent history. Yeah, there was no such thing as adult autistics. Obviously now there is. So back as a child, I was undiagnosed. I was very intelligent and I did a lot of maths. I taught my Teddy's maths. I did lots of weird and quirky things. But it was only when my eldest child was really struggling at school, and we didn't really know what was going on. And we got him diagnosed and he was autistic. But again, he was 8 or 9, so he was quite late to be diagnosed from a child perspective as well. And that really changed my whole perspective of what I thought autism was. So up until that point, I was really uneducated in autism, in neurodivergent people. I thought to be autistic meant you couldn't talk, that you did quirky things with your hands, a bit like Rain Man. Like I had this really stereotypical thought of what an autistic person would look like. And yeah, I was very wrong on all counts. And my child was autistic with PDA. And because of that, we had to do a lot of learning. One, how to parent him that really met his needs, how to advocate for him, because parents are the voices of their children. Children very rarely actually get heard by other adults. So we had to start talking for him. And the more learning I did, the more I was like, this is actually me. This is how I see the world, and this is what I stand for, and this is how I felt. And yeah, the more learning I did about my child, the more I resonated with what he was actually going through, which ultimately led to me getting referred and getting my diagnosis in 2022. The way it changed my life, I'm still the same person. So it's not that I got my diagnosis and I've gone from not being autistic to autistic. I was always autistic. I just didn't know before. So before I thought that I was a bit weird, that I couldn't keep friends, that there was something wrong with me. Like I could never tolerate pubs. So I used to drink more than probably I should do because I was just trying to make myself feel comfortable in that situation. Really struggled in group WhatsApps. So all these things that people just do that's easy for them, or I perceive as it being easy for them, I really struggled with. Yet put me in front of a complex maths formula and I could do that really easily. So people are like, well, you can't be struggling in this really simple thing because you can do really well in this really hard thing. So yeah, it made me feel weird is the best way. Like I didn't feel like less than, but I felt like I never really fit in. Getting my diagnosis gave me the words of why I felt the way I felt. I then started to understand my sensory needs and why sometimes I used to get really bad migraines in the office because of the lighting. It was all my sensory, my nervous system not being able to react to my sensory surroundings. And yeah, before my autism diagnosis, I didn't know. I didn't have the words. I didn't know. So more than anything, it just helped me understand myself to a much deeper level, and also my children. So yeah, it didn't really change me, but definitely changed my perception of myself to one that I can be better with.
This conversation is obviously, we had a chat, didn't we, about 12 months ago, and the conversation inspired me so much and taught me so much that we talked straight away about getting on the podcast, didn't we? Because I was like, everybody needs to hear this. Because I had an idea of what I thought autism was, and you were the first person that ever showed me that actually, no, you are totally wrong. It could mean anything. Basically, it's individual to that person, isn't it? It could mean all these different things. So that's why I just thought, no, we definitely need to get this conversation out. So that's so good to know. Thank you for sharing that. And I think to link that then to the story you were telling earlier to prior to your diagnosis and how you got to where you are today, how do you think your neuro makeup has helped you get to where you are?
So I think one, my tenacity. So there's it's got a really long word. It's called monotropism, I think is how you pronounce it. Someone can correct me. Because pronouncing words, believe it or not, with a social communication difficulty, is something I struggle with. So, but I think it's called monotropism, and monotropism is where some people will call it hyperfocus as well. It's very similar. So it's where you've got one thing and you just go all in and focus on it. I do that with business. I've always loved business from being a little girl. So I used to teach my teddies how to, I used to teach my teddies maths. I used to run tuck shops in my back garden. Like I've always wanted to learn how business works, and it's been something that I've always done like forever. And I've always wanted to know like how, not necessarily why, but how does that work? How does this work from a operations perspective? So it's never been from an engineering. Like I don't really care about how machines work, but how do organizations work has been something that's fascinated me forever.
That's a bit of a stereotype as well, isn't it? When a lot of if you were to talk to somebody who might not understand autism at all, they might reference to how someone they know that's autistic has an absolute love for, say, for example, trains or something along those lines. Stereotype for sure, because I've heard that. Heard that one myself.
Yes, they are the stereotypes. So look, like it used to be trains and numbers. I mean, I was fascinated with numbers. Like I did have that stereotype. I've always been fascinated with numbers and dates, and like when numbers look really nice and like a 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm like, that's lovely. But it's this special interest thing. So my special interest as a child was Disney. You couldn't, like, Disney was my special interest. I knew all the songs to all the words to all the songs. I still do. I'm still very into Disney. Books was another one. So I used to get told off all the time for reading when I should have been doing something else. This was in class as well as at home. I always had my head in a book. And business. Since probably my teens, I got really into business and I've never looked back. And I think when I got into finance, that was when I started to really understand, like, I see finance as like the heart of a business. Like, although you've got your ops and you've got finance, sees it all, and it also sees how it all connects, as not any other departments don't really see all the dots connecting. And I could see that. So if ops aren't doing what they need to do, and marketing don't, like, kill down what they're doing, we're going to have too many orders and not enough in my ops to do the orders, which then affects brand because you're not delivering what you need to deliver. And from a finance perspective, you get to see how every department affects everything and ultimately drops out the bottom line. So yeah, I didn't know that when I stepped into finance at 17. I just knew I like numbers and I like business, and that seemed like a really relevant place to go. Yeah. But what it's actually given me is a picture of how business works from, like, behind the scenes, I suppose, rather than up front. Yeah. Which has definitely helped. And I think the other thing is my bluntness. I think that works quite well. So I don't faff about and I don't, like, mollycoddle. I'm quite blunt with the way I speak, and that's helped me get to where I am because no one needs to second guess what I mean. I mean what I say and I say what I mean. And then my team, like, people say, oh, how can an autistic with no empathy, because that's another stereotype, lead a team? And actually that's nonsense. Like, I can create safety for my teams, and because they don't have to second guess what I mean. If I say you've done a good job, I mean you've done a good job. Like, you don't have to second guess what I'm saying at any point, which I think is, I think that's how it's helped me. It's the patterns, it's the dot connections, it's it all, really.
Absolutely. And what about on the flip side of that then? What have you found to be more challenging since your diagnosis?
Since my diagnosis, so the first thing, the challenging part of being autistic in business, again, is the bluntness. So some people, I mean what I say and I say what I mean, but some people decide that means something else because they've put their own story on what I've said, or you can't possibly mean that. So that's probably been quite challenging throughout my career, is going, no, that I mean what I said I meant in the first place. And the whole email communication, the communication piece in my earlier career, I probably really struggled with without realising. I've got better with it the older I've got. But since my diagnosis, my biggest thing has been other people's opinions of me. It's like there's this thing in the media at the minute about DEI. It's everywhere, that people with it or championing it are these people that want a lot for nothing, and actually that isn't the case in a lot of cases. They can kind of stigmatize you even though that's not what you want. So that's been the most challenging part of being diagnosed. It's been other people's perception changing around me, even though I'm still the same person.
Yeah, totally get what you're saying there as well with the with the way that DE&I is kind of portrayed in the media. You see a lot around, like, the woke brigade type thing, we'll look back on this in, like, generations down the line. Like, can you believe all of this was written about and everyone was jumping on this bandwagon? And it'll be an interesting.
I hope we look back and laugh at it, and it doesn't. I really do hope we get there. But yeah, it's because ultimately all the people are trying to do when we're talking about DEI is make people feel safer in work. And if people feel safer in work, they're going to have a bigger impact in that work. Like, no one unsafe and fearful is going to do a good job. So making people feel safe, making people feel welcome, and like they're going to do a better job for you. So why, for me, I just don't understand why you wouldn't make it a safer environment for people.
Yeah, no, I know. And I think that, I suppose, leads us on to, I know we talked about some of the stereotypes and misconceptions about autism, and that was, I suppose, like a more of a lighter note around the things that you might sort of like really fixate on. But what have you found, just obviously we're just talking there about DE&I, what have you found to be sort of some of the common myths or misunderstandings that you've come across, especially like in relation to your work as well?
Yeah, so I'd say that a lot of the misconceptions are that to be autistic means that you're not a people person.
Yeah.
I am a big people person. I love humans. So yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest myths, and my children as well. So my children are two are diagnosed, two are on the pathway, and they are all extroverts. They all thrive in social situations. They struggle to maintain relationships because their ages that they're at, but on the whole, they are human people. They love humans. So I think that's a really big one. And also there's this common conversation about autistic people and kind of putting all autistic people in the same bucket. Yeah, every autistic person is different. So just because you know me and I need this, this, and this, the next autistic person you meet will be completely different to me because they are their own individual person. And yes, we will have some commonalities that we might struggle with, but also there'll be something that I struggle with that they will find really easy, and vice versa. So it's this, when companies as well are trying to put like a blanket approach into dealing with their autistic employees, is unhelpful and harmful at worst. Like it's just not what you should be doing. Everything needs to be done on an individual basis because humans are individuals with individual needs.
Yeah. And I suppose that in itself is wonder, like, what on earth can we do, like, to make sure we are supporting everybody? So I suppose it would be really good to talk about, in your experience, because obviously this whole new world has opened to you since 2022. If someone's listening to this and they're starting to recognise some of these things, maybe in themselves or in somebody within their team, what strategies or accommodations do you think could be helpful in creating an inclusive work environment?
Communication for starters, like just being open to have a conversation, and be open to listen. So if you do think that one of your employees is struggling with XYZ, ask them, are you struggling with XYZ? Like, build a culture where you can have open conversation. No one's fearful to say, yeah, I am actually struggling with that. And then you say, oh, well, how can we help you? Communication for starters, like just being open to have a conversation, and be open to listen. So if you do think that one of your employees is struggling with XYZ, ask them. I think companies are really scared that this is going to cost them a load of money. And they see it as a cost. As I'm like, you're already spending a lot of money because you're paying for these salaries and people aren't performing the way they could perform. So like, I see it as like, it's the wrong way to frame it. And actually you could put a £50 solution in place. They feel heard. They feel loyal to the brand now because you've listened to them and you've helped them and they're achieving what they want to achieve. And you're going to get more than the 50 quid you've just spent on them. Because it's not always a big thing. I was speaking to one of my business connections last week and I went into her offices. She had an app which reduces the lights in the office. And I was like, this is so cool. She was like, yeah, well, they noticed that I get migraines. And they're like, oh, do you think it might be the lights? And she was like, oh, I don't know. So they put dimmers in some of the offices. So when she's in there, she can turn them down. She's not had a migraine at work since. So it was that, do you know, like, but she feels so secure now that they asked and they put a dimmer in and now she goes to work and doesn't get migraines.
Has she been diagnosed as autistic, or
no, that's just
going to be
like, it doesn't need, that's what I mean, like, it doesn't need to be a diagnostic. It's we should be looking at our people as people and not as robots. And yes, some might have an autism diagnosis and some might have an ADHD diagnosis, but we shouldn't be just asking the people with diagnosis what support they need. We should be asking our entire workforce what support we need, because that also then reduces this stigma against neurodivergence, because I think some of it comes from jealousy. It comes from those who aren't diagnosed or who think they might be but don't have the means to, because you've got to think, like, up until recently adults weren't diagnosed. If you were missed at childhood, you didn't get a diagnosis. The wait list on the NHS, I think at the minute is 3 years.
Is it really? Wow.
Yeah, and to pay privately, you're talking thousands of pounds. So some people, one, don't even bother getting on the wait list, because why would I if it's 3 years long? I might as well just carry on struggling. And I don't have thousands of pounds, so I'm not going to go private. So they just stay. And then they see someone with a diagnosis getting all their accommodations. It just creates this, like, envy, which isn't helpful. As I think if companies just saw their people as people and, like, how can I help you achieve your best, and how can I help you achieve your best? We just take that all away.
I've never had any diagnosis, but I know for a fact that if one of my old managers before I worked for myself had I used to ask for a headset all the time, and the reason for that was because I got really distracted by other people's conversations in the office when I was trying to concentrate. And I don't know if that's a typical kind of trait or not, but if they'd have just let me have my headset, but because I wasn't asking for any reason, if I'd have said, I've had this diagnosis, this is going to help me work better, I'd have got it straight away. But because there was no diagnosis, and this is going back 5-6 years, and I think a lot has changed since then. I sit now with my AirPods in, and my team know that I'm on noise cancelling and I can't hear them because I'll just get chatting. I'll get too distracted. I can't concentrate. I can't listen and read at the same time. But it's just, so that's the thing, isn't it? Just like, in general, it doesn't need to be complicated. Just look at who you've got, and actually, even if you suspect, they keep getting distracted when someone else is talking, I'll get them a headset, see if that helps, or ask them if they want one. It doesn't have to work.
And it's not necessarily, I wouldn't necessarily target it. I'd be like, there's headphones here for anyone who wants to use one. For anyone who feels like that could be helpful for them. Yeah. There's a box of fiddle toys. I always have a fiddle toy when I'm talking because it keeps my hands busy. Before I had fiddle toys, I'd always doodle. Like, there's always something in my hand whilst I'm listening.
I'm doing here.
Yeah.
Ring around. Like, I cannot think if I'm not moving my hands. And this is the thing, like, how many people have you noticed now since learning all of this? Since my conversation with you last year, I notice all sorts, and I wonder, and I think, I know someone else that does this, or I do this sometimes, and it does make you think.
And I think there is some things that are like very human. So humans, I don't think we're ever made to be sat still at desks. Like, we're animals at the end of the day. So I don't think it's when there's a lot of things. So I can't remember the full DSM-5 diagnostics because I'm not a doctor. But there's like 3 strands: one's social communications, one's sensory, and one's emotional regulation. So my emotional regulation, for instance, I would keep it in at work, but then I'd come home and I'd be in meltdown. I wouldn't be able to be a mother. I'd be crying. I'd really struggle. Again, I'd think it was something wrong with me. So my emotional regulation was always a bit rubbish outside of work. In work, I could perform, hence why I got to where I did so quickly. And then your sensory stuff, for me, it's things like, if there was a uniform offered at work, you can guarantee I was accepting it, because if I don't have to think about what I'm wearing every day, hallelujah. So, and then particularly if it was like a polo shirt and a hoodie, perfect. Lights were always an issue for me. And then the temperature, like if it's too hot or too cold, I can't concentrate. If my fingers are too cold, I can't type. If it's too hot, all I can think about is the fact that I'm too hot. So there's quite a lot of different like sensory profile, and I'm heightened on quite a lot. And again, I didn't know this before, but things like a tapping pen, for instance.
Yeah.
And anyone who's worked with me who's listening will be like, yes, she was a nightmare. So if I was in a meeting and someone was tapping the pen, I'd be like, can whoever's clicking the pen please stop, because I can't hear what everyone else is saying, because all I would be able to hear was the clicking pen. And then some of my colleagues would do it on purpose because they find it hilarious. But it was like, I can't hear past the click. It's the same with ticking clock. All I can hear is that. So I use sound cancelling headphones sometimes because it's too quiet, and all I can hear is the little repetitive sounds, and I find repetitive sounds really distracting.
Interesting. This is the thing, like, I love talking about all these little things that you've noticed, because I think other people listening to this, there might be some out there that think, oh, hang on, I do this, or I feel like that. Other people going home and having a meltdown at home when they've been able to hold it together all day at work, I'd
lose my words as well. By Friday night, I couldn't talk quite often, particularly in stressful periods at work. It'd get to Friday night, and then I used to cancel my friends' plans, like I can't go out for dinner and I'd make up a wild excuse, but it was actually because I can't talk.
Yeah.
I literally can't string a sentence together. I'm incoherent. I can't be seen like this. Like, this isn't who I am. And that's the hardest part, actually. Before you know you're autistic and before you know that your brain is just overwhelmed and actually can't do this because you've put it under too much the days before, you actually feel like there's something wrong with you. Like, I'm a fully grown adult, so why can't I string a sentence together on a Friday evening?
Yeah.
But it all goes unsaid and like no one talks about it because we all need to be perceived as an adult that can perform.
Yeah, and I suppose you'd have then with that the feelings of letting people down or guilt that you can't be there and show up as the bubbly friend when
Yeah,
you've got nothing left,
got
basically.
nothing. I just
Uh,
need a fluffy blanket and
yeah,
rubbish telly.
yeah, yeah. Chocolate bar.
Yeah, I
Um,
always laugh. It was last year, I think, I was speaking to one of my friends because they're like, you just wouldn't know. You wouldn't know you struggle the way you struggle. And I was like, well, I wouldn't know I struggle. This is part of the issue. So it's not until I can't talk that I realise that, oh, I
yeah.
pushed myself a bit far this
Mm,
week. There's no warning for me that I'm going too far. And I think one day I'll learn, but because I've masked for so long in my life, I ignore my own body's like warning systems because I don't know what they are yet. It doesn't happen as often as it used to because I have got things in place.
yeah.
But yeah, it used to be. And when I'm going through particularly challenging situations,
Mm.
that rears its head very quickly, the autistic burnout, because you're constantly worrying about X, Y, Z. But yeah,
But I suppose at the same time, it probably all a lot of it will make sense now. I guess that you've always been this ultra high performer, and I bet some people have looked at you and thought, "How does she do this? How does she? She's like a machine. How does she just keep going and going and going?" And then all of a
yeah,
sudden, it hits you, and they might not see that. But I suppose you've all this time you've been that ultra high achiever because of this. So now I suppose you're able to, hopefully, or you will be able to help balance that a little bit.
Yeah, and I
Uh,
think there's certain things. So I'm a really high performer in certain areas of my life, and I'm really rubbish performer in other areas of my life. So I can't eat very well. So my food is absolutely atrocious, and always has been. And I just thought, oh, I have a bad relationship with food. It's actually I don't have that executive function with food. So in my household, my husband does all the food prep, all the cooking, because otherwise we just wouldn't eat because it's just not something that enters my brain. Like if I'm deep in a spreadsheet, I won't notice I'm hungry. I won't cook. I won't. I just won't do any of that, and then I'll feel really faint and be like, oh, should have probably ate something today.
I'm really
Um, so
right
like
now.
I'm really good at work, but these other areas that other people will do really easily just don't even come onto my radar that that's something I should be doing. Food is the biggest one. And supermarkets. I can't go to supermarkets. I do occasionally go. If I'm going, I will wear a cap, I will wear sound cancelling headphones.
Yeah.
On the whole, I don't go. And I made a post on one of my Instagrams a while ago now, and it says like some things you do see. You see someone doing an MBA and smashing life, but you don't see the panic attack trying to get into a Tesco. Like, and that is so real for me. Both are true for this paradox that is me, but it doesn't make me any less than as someone who can run businesses. Like,
Yeah.
but don't ask me to go and get milk from Tesco because the answer is no.
Yeah. It's so interesting. And I think, we've talked about how some people might be, we were talking earlier about undiagnosed people,
Yeah.
but for those that do have a diagnosis but are hesitant to disclose it because they're worried about stigma or discrimination.
Yeah.
Obviously, you chose to embrace your diagnosis. In hindsight, would you have chosen differently or not?
It's such a tricky question. In hindsight, for me, no. Yeah, I like to embrace who I am and suffer the consequences. However, that hasn't necessarily been without scars. Like it hasn't been an easy process
Yeah.
at all. Um, so in hindsight, probably would have protected my family a bit better if
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't have disclosed it.
Mm-hmm.
But as I'm autistic, I have a high sense of justice and I
Mm-hmm.
have to live with integrity. And I would feel like I was living a lie every day. And that
Yeah.
would have harmed me. So I couldn't do that either. So I did disclose it. I would do again. I would like to think that by the time my children are in the workplace, they wouldn't have to think like this. It shouldn't be a should I or should I not, and is there going to be negative things because I've declared it.
Mm-hmm.
In reality, right now, with the way the media are portraying autism, ADHD, it isn't necessarily safe to do so, which is really sad. But it's also not safe to not, because your internal integrity will eat away at you. So it's like it's a rock and a hard place. Like it's very tricky. For me, it's finding other people that do understand, having conversations that light you up and inspire you, and you feel safe, and finding the people you feel safe with. And then I also think if it's not for you, if you declare it and there is that negative response, that's data for you to be like, oh, well, maybe this place isn't for me. Maybe I need to find a place that is for me. And at the minute,
what you could do in a place that fully supports you,
is phenomenal. However, as I've realised, the places like that exist are few and far between at the minute. So there is a lot of autistic and ADHD people self-employed and making their own workplaces because they can't find a place that actually works for them.
What I'd say, if anyone's listening to that and it's resonating, if either I or my team can help in any way in structuring those kinds of questions and conversations at interviews so that you can try and unpick and understand whether this is a safe place in terms of, is it somewhere that can accept and appreciate neurodiversity or not, then just shout up, either message me or even you, Laura, and you'd be able to help with that as well. And I suppose that on that note, like for employers listening to this, how can organisations foster that culture of acceptance and appreciation? I mean, we've kind of touched on it anyway, haven't we, really?
Say from like an interview and onboarding point of view and recruitment point of view, to tie it into what you're doing, it's not just a lovely conversation, is probably first of all, it's got to be top down. So you can't just be doing, particularly if you're wanting to attract autistics in particular, like, we know when you're lying, so don't even try. So it has to be top down. It can't just be this token gesture of, oh, we're interviewing you because we take DEI seriously. No, you need to take DEI seriously. It needs to be a top-down approach. You need to have all your C-suite really thinking, we want a diverse workforce and we're going to do what it takes to do that, first off. Then if you've got that, they're going to be supportive in you putting recruitment processes in place that do really help get a diverse workforce. One way that I think is really helpful, and it happened a couple of employers before, they sent, and obviously this is before I was diagnosed, but I remember receiving it and going, oh, this is really helpful. I wish everyone did this. It was like a booklet for your interview, and it was this is who you're going to be interviewed by, and it was a headshot of who they were. This is the building, and it was a picture of the building. This is the car park. You can park in the visitor bay, XYZ. So I just knew I can park in this visitor. I'm not going to get told off to go and move my car, which happens quite often in office blocks. I knew I was at the right building because I had a photo of it. Again, because there's usually lots of signs depending on who it is, and you don't know, am I at the right place? And then when the person came into reception to meet me, I knew who they were because I'd seen the headshot. And that was just really helpful for me. It took away some of that ambiguity that is sometimes or always in an interview process. To make that even better would be to give some pre-questions. So I see both points where people want to see how you are on the spot, but actually there's some jobs that doesn't require quick thinking. That is like you sit and you do some coding, or you sit and you do the balance sheet recs, and you don't need to be thinking quick constantly. It's not a constant quick think. So I still don't really understand why when we interview it's always to test people's response time, like when actually that might be completely irrelevant to the role they're applying for, and giving people the same 5 or 6 questions. We are going to ask these questions. We're giving it you in advance so you can start to think about some examples. They've got time to really think about what is relevant, and then they can bring that to you. This helps people that maybe are a bit more introverted, do need a bit more processing time to think about, what is relevant to that. And also can ease the nerves, like, because they know they're going to be able to answer 5 of the questions. And you can add some more on, but then if every candidate, and it doesn't have to be just the ones that have said they're autistic, but if every candidate that's in for that role gets those same 5, you'll actually be able to see what they're like with information that they've received, and then they have to think about it. Like, it's actually a different skill that maybe is more relevant to the role you were applying for.
Yeah. I once shared a LinkedIn post off the back of our conversation around what we can be doing to make our interview process more inclusive. And I shared about the car park, the photos of who you meet and all the rest of it. So we actually changed our interview prep process off the back of that conversation to give people as much information as we can possibly get them. Even, sometimes all we can do is go on Google and a Google search and go as the little man on the street and take a screenshot of the front of the building. But if we can just do that and it helps one person and it can get them past that initial, if they turn up and they're all flustered and worked up because they have no idea who they're meeting or where they were going, and they're just glad they got there on time, that sort of thing. If we can just try and eliminate some of that, then we feel like we're helping in some way. So we're trying to have these sorts of conversations with clients when we're asking around what their interview process is and what questions are they going to ask, giving our candidates a heads up on the questions, and it's really working. And obviously I don't know, out of these candidates, no one ever really says to me whether they're autistic or not. So I don't really know, which ones that this is actually helping for because of autism. So and I think
that's one of the big things, though, Phoebe, like, for me, businesses shouldn't be doing this because autism's on the rise or ADHD's on the rise. They should be doing it because it's helpful for humans. And people might not have a diagnosis. They might not want a diagnosis. They might be against getting medical diagnoses for whatever reason. But that shouldn't mean that we're not helpful and we don't want to set people up for success. Like, let's just do the right thing.
Historically, have been set up to catch people out and have been set up to see, let's make this really quite difficult. Let's see how people respond on the spot. Let's ask them really difficult questions. Let's whack out the competency questions and see if they can remember all these 4 elements of the star that they need to put in. I've been in recruitment 12 years and I still could not answer a competency question in that format. I'd find it really difficult because I'd be too busy thinking STAR whilst trying to deliver an answer. And I speak to so many people who struggle with that. And I don't understand why just anyway interviews have been set up for people to fail. Then, they're lucky if one person gets through the process. Why not get 5 people get through the process and then you've got the pick of all these people? Strange. I could go down that rabbit hole all day anyway, but I suppose looking ahead, and we have sort of touched on areas there as to how people can support with like the onboarding. What improvements, sorry if you've just covered this, I suppose, but just in case there is anything else, what improvements would you like to see in the workplace just to better support? I was just going to say better support autistic professionals, but now I'm just thinking just in general, actually. How can we just support people in general?
How can we just be nice to people?
Yeah.
Inviting the conversation, then listening to the conversation, then acting on the conversation. Like, it's not rocket science. And I think some people, like, I've had conversations like, well, I had to deal with it. I had to put up with it. Well, that's great for you. But just because you had it hard, do we have to continue making it hard?
Yeah.
Like, really? Is that what we need to be doing?
I suppose you once said to me, and I've got a note of it here. You once said that all these businesses are missing out because they're not tapping into the genius.
Yeah.
And I think that's so powerful because
it is so true as well.
Like, invest in understanding this better and invest in making improvements to better support people and see what you get back.
Yeah, if people are worried, so if someone turns up to work and they've not been able to park the car, they've battled with being on a motorway, they've made it to work, they're a little bit late, they're a little bit flustered because you've got a rigid 8:30 a.m. start. They've had to get the kids out. They're all at Breakfast Club. They get in, they can't park the car. They manage to dump the car. Then they're at the desk. Then the lights are shining in the face. Someone's clicking the pen. You're not getting the best out of that employee. Yeah, if you just said, you know what, turn up between the hours of 8 and 10. We need you to work X amount of hours a week, but start times are flexible. Do what makes you most comfortable in the morning. If that means you need to do a workout before you come to work, great. But our meetings start at 10:30. Before that, no one will book a meeting. They come in, they're not as flustered. People are aware that clicking pens really irritate this person, so they don't click pens. Or even better, the company doesn't provide pens that click. Because sometimes it's not that people want to click pens, it's that they're fidgeting themselves. So the company actually goes, do you know what?
I've had people lose interviews because clicking a pen in the interview. What a stupid reason to reject somebody from a job.
As if there's a fidget, which I don't have. I'm looking on my desk to see if I don't have one with me. It's like a net, really small. It's smaller than a pen. It's like a net bag with a marble in it, and you rub it, and it's the same finger movement as clicking a pen, but it's silent. So a company could just provide them. Like everyone gets one of them on the desk, whether you're autistic or not, because that'll stop you clicking pens. Stress balls. It's the same thing though. It's just having something in your hands. And not seeing it as an autistic thing, just seeing it as we're just going to provide things for humans to pick up if they need them. Like we provide coffee and tea, like we also provide fidget toys and a flexible start. And then it's like when someone's that comfortable and their nervous system is regulated, then they can then perform. But if they're still trying to meet their nervous system needs, they're still trying to meet their sensory needs, they're still doing that before they can perform. Yeah. And I think that's where businesses get it wrong. Like they're like, oh, they're just asking for more, but they're underperforming. Well, actually, they're underperforming because you've not met the needs that they need meeting in order to perform.
Yeah.
And this underperformer isn't aware of it, so doesn't know how to fight back either. I mean, some will, but there's quite a lot that aren't even aware that they are autistic or
underperforming.
Yeah, they just think, oh, I am really rubbish. I really struggle to keep hold of jobs, and yeah, it's all me. And that breaks my heart because I see my children and I'm like, I don't ever want that for them. Yeah. And autism, like people say it's a spectrum, and I bring it back to autism because that's my diagnosis. But people say it's a spectrum, and people think that's like here and here, and you land somewhere on the scale. And people say to me like, you must be really high on the scale because you're high functioning. Compared to this low end of the scale where someone might not be able to speak or need to use a communication device. When actually it's not like that at all. It's more like a spider's web of like points on it. So yes, I'm very high functioning in my world of work, but I'm very low functioning in my emotional regulation outside of work. Like my sensory needs are very high, and I'm very low functioning in my executive function, hence why I lose things all the time. I need lists everywhere. Kieran's favourite story to tell is when I was making a chicken in a bag. Do you know them chicken in a bags that you put in? And I was reading the list and it told me to put like some tomato in it or something, and I don't like tomato. So I stopped reading the list and just put it in the oven. So I didn't then put the water in. I didn't do this next thing and this next thing that I needed to do. And he was like, why did you just stop reading it? And I was like, because I didn't want that. And he's like, but you have to carry on reading the list. And it's like, yeah, so you think I'm this high functioning person because you see this work me.
Yeah.
But these simple things that I find really difficult are really on a different part of the spectrum.
Your job and what in your whole career, you've had such an interest in that for your entire life that you've honed in on, no, I love this, I really want to do this. And because you've become that fixated on, and you can become so fixated on something like a spreadsheet or some numbers, you've then gone to excel in that. But I suppose it's that thing of like you've landed in that perfect career for you. And there are probably so many people out there who don't know what that would be for them. If their thing is that they like bird watching, what's the perfect career for them? They're not, they're going to struggle in whatever they go into because it's not bird watching
Yeah.
or whatever thing it is. I've got a cousin who is absolutely, and he's autistic, and he loves well, he used to be numbers actually. He did used to be numbers, but then he got into like performing arts and anything musical or ABBA or
Yeah,
like,
amazing.
and it's a shame because he's not gone down that path, so he has struggled and he's bounced around different jobs and struggled to hold them down, and is not in his like in that zone that you're
Yes,
in.
I'm really trying with my children to help them with their special interests. Now, when the special interests change, and there's like certain ones that are like, what's the word? Staples, foundations, special interests.
Yeah.
So my daughter's is football. She really wants to be a professional footballer. Whether she makes it or not is irrelevant for us, but we do everything we can to keep her in that football arena. But we're also looking at what other careers are. Like she's already looking at what other careers are there in football. So she wants to work within that sphere, whether it's a professional footballer or a coach or a data analyst, but she wants to work within the football industry. So we're already looking now, like who can we make connections with now when she's 12 for her to get some work experience in the industry because she loves football.
Oh, let's catch up afterwards actually.
Okay.
I might contact you.
Excellent. And then my eldest, he really wants to be a lawyer. So again, the same thing's happening. So who's in our network that we could get him in contact with to help him build his lawyer thing? Then my 7-year-old's current special interest is sharks. So we're gonna have to move. It doesn't quite work. And I said, like, if that carries on, like he wants to be a shark scientist when he's older, or an archaeologist is his current, and they are special interests that he is zoned in. He reads about sharks. If you asked him a fact, he'll be able to tell you all about how many teeth certain sharks have.
More challenging, won't it? It's not as mainstream as
not as mainstream, but also not impossible. And because we're not saying, oh, that's silly, or stop talking about sharks, start talking about this. We're just going, right, if you can learn everything about sharks, you can then be one of the best people that apply for that job when it comes up, because you're going to know everything there is to know. You're going to know what's needed in the shark industry and be able to, so I think finding your special interests, but then also thinking, right, how can I put myself in that sphere? And yes, I was very lucky that mine's business, because business is everywhere. So I was very, very lucky that that did become my special interest.
There's a stereotype as well. But is there a thing really where a lot of people end up in finance?
Yeah.
Because I speak to accountants all day long, and I have done for 12 years, and there's been so many times and so many conversations, and I've thought, definitely, no one loves numbers. No one loves numbers like this. This person is obsessed with this spreadsheet.
I would definitely say I feel like it's a profession that attracts the logical, and that does definitely sway more, particularly for autism, more than ADHD. Like ADHDs tend to be more creative, have a bit more of a wild brain, but autism for sure is very very stereotypically very logic, and I definitely see a lot of it. And also I find it just as frustrating sometimes, like because sometimes we can be quite black and white and can't see the grey, which is really good in accounts, because we kind of have to be a bit black and white, like it's right or wrong, but it's also quite tricky at times because there is certain times where it's not black and white and it is a bit grey, and we have to play in this grey area. But I definitely see it definitely attracts.
Yeah.
And I think the same because law, like, no, my eldest, I nearly said his name then. He likes law, and it's because he likes language. He likes the patterns in language.
Oh.
And I'm quite like that as well. So that's why I love books. Like I like seeing a story and joining the dots and the patterns of different stories. And he's the same. He likes seeing the pattern in language.
Akatar.
Pardon?
I noticed that you'd been reading like the Akatar books.
Finished, yeah.
Oh, I lost 13 weeks of my life to those books, and I thought I was going to respond to your post, and I thought no, because you'll get hooked back into it. You'll start reading them again, like it's just so. Yeah, but I just thought, incredible book series. So what I would say then, I suppose it would be good if you could just let everybody know. Anybody wants to connect with you and reach out, how are they best finding you?
So LinkedIn Laura Hadcroft is where I hang out on LinkedIn, which is where I'm quite professional. Then you can find me on Instagram, which is I am Laura Hadcroft, which is where I'm a bit more creative, still professional, but a bit more creative. You see a bit more behind the scenes of what I'm building and what I'm doing. And then Threads, if you want to see my every thought, because I like to just throw things out there, which is also I am Laura Hadcroft.
Love a bit of Threads. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for telling your story, for taking the time. I know we've bounced around a few different topics there, but there's so much to cover, and I think we could just talk about it forever. So yeah, if obviously if anyone wants to, I'll pop all of your links in the notes as well, so that if anyone wants to connect. But hopefully that'll resonate with some people. And you know, if it's not them themselves, hopefully they'll come away with a deeper understanding as to how they can foster that bit more inclusive environment wherever they are.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.